Hey there everyone, this is Samuel Johnson and welcome back to the Steven Universe Retrospectives, and today we're going to be discussing episodes 43 and 44 of Steven Universe, Maximum Capacity and Marble Madness. And as always, let's talk about the odd numbered episode first, Maximum Capacity. In this case, what's going on is that Steven and Greg are getting ready to empty Greg's shed. What happened is that Greg was going to try and store a stand-in that he had for the car wash that he used during the summer, and now the sale is over, mostly because it didn't actually get any new business. He's gonna try and store it away, but unfortunately the shed is packed to maximum capacity. As such, nothing else can fit in there, and if anything tries to get added, it causes the risk of everything collapsing on the nearest living thing. As such, Steven and Greg realize they need to organize and go through all this stuff, figure out what they want to keep, what they should probably get rid of, etc. And Steven thinks that he knows a gem that'll be able to help them sort through everything. And he gets Amethyst, which even surprises Greg. But Steven's argument is that he thinks Amethyst would be perfect for this job because, well, her room is full of junk. She knows how to get through a giant mess like this. The trio immediately gets to work sorting through Greg's stuff, and of course, Amethyst is as helpful as you think she would be, as she likes to keep, as Steven has organized 3 boxes for everything that's in the shed. Stuff that they want to keep, stuff that they should sell, and stuff they just want to, burn. However, Amethyst, being Amethyst, doesn't want to throw anything away because, well, I guess Greg isn't the only hoarder. But as they go through everything, Greg happens to find something. In this case, a picture of himself and Rose. Now, this is one that we had actually seen in an earlier episode, specifically episode 2 of the series, and Steven wound up accidentally crushing it while he was in the shed, as he had to sort through Greg's shed to find the laser light cannon, and he accidentally cracked the frame on this one. As such, Greg finds the cracked frame, and he's naturally disheartened, but he's still trying to see the bright side of this, because, yeah, the frame is broken, but the picture's still intact. However, as Steven and Greg are looking at this, you can see Amethyst in the background looking slightly upset, or she goes off into some random pile and finds something. In this case, a set of videotapes for a show called Lil Butler. Essentially, this Mr. Belvedere-esque show that centers around a rich family who ends up adopting Lil Butler, essentially this little kid who was just knocking on the doorstep, and they end up adopting it and turn him into their Jeeves because he's got a little mustache or whatever. I personally think that'd be something that worth studying, because I don't know why a kid would have a mustache, but whatever. He does their job, and apparently Greg and Amethyst love this show. As such, Amethyst immediately puts the show in, and Greg and Amethyst end up getting sucked into it and stop cleaning up all the crap. Steven does tries to rouse them and say, hey, we gotta get back to this, but Amethyst and Greg are just more sucked into the show. So Steven decides to just call it a wash and try again the next day. As such, he does end up going back there because, like I said, next day, and he ends up bringing breakfast, but when he returns to the shed, Greg and Amethyst are still watching the show. And when Steven makes them aware of what the time of the day is, well, it does nearly rouse Greg, but just every time he tries to get up, Amethyst instead directs him to another gag that's on the show, and he gets lost in it again. As such, Steven once again is ready to call it a wash and leave, but he wants to remind Greg of something. You see, at the beginning of this episode, Steven actually talked with Greg about a certain event that's going to be happening. Specifically, the New Year's arriving. It's New Year's Eve today, and Steven and Greg are going to go to the celebration, which is supposed to be a bunch of fireworks to ring in the new year, and what they typically do is that they bang pots to celebrate and so forth. As such, Steven reminds Greg of this appointment, and Greg says he'll be there, but it's clear that he's kind of still out of it, as he's still paying more attention to the show. As such, Steven does eventually leave while Amethyst takes the breakfast that Steven brought them. And then the episode then cuts to that night, as Steven has gotten Pearl and Garnet to help him, essentially reign in the new year. As they have a little spot on the beach with a bunch of other people, they're all wearing sweaters, which Pearl and Garnet clearly don't need them, but they're wearing them anyway for tradition's sake. So as Steven's setting them up and giving them things that they can smack, he tells them that Greg will come by later with Amethyst, and Pearl and Garnet are like, wait, why would they be coming by? Why would they both be coming by? And they soon reveal that apparently Greg and Amethyst used to hang out like this before, As once they realize that Greg and Amethyst are coming together, they begin asking, wait, are they hanging out again? And they better not be watching that stupid show, and yeah, this is something they did before. They used to, apparently back in the good old days, they tended to disappear for days and just sit on their asses watching the show together. It was annoying, nobody liked it, but one day, for whatever reason, it just stopped. Nobody, Pearl really doesn't know, Pearl and Garnet don't really know why, but it does kind of raise some concern, which is immediately dropped as the New Year is reined in and fireworks are displayed, and, well, Pearl and Garnet do their typical shenanigans as Pearl lightly taps hers while Garnet just bangs her pot so loud the whole beach can hear them. As such, Steven goes back to the storage unit to try and get Greg, but as he goes there, he finds Greg and Amethyst as they're in between videos, and as one video ends, Greg can hear the fireworks, and he realizes, oh shit, I'm missing the New Year I promised Steven. But once again, as he tries to get up, Amethyst stops him and once more tries to tempt him with more episodes of Lil Butler. So Greg, however, at this point is really not going for it because he promised Steven and he really did want to go with his son. But Amethyst keeps pushing and pushing, and the more Greg is not budging, the more upset she's getting, to the point where she starts actively getting a bit more hostile. She starts messing with him more by shapeshifting into different forms to mock him. Like, first she turns into Steven and says, oh boy, the fireworks are great, now let's watch more Lil Butler. And then when Greg gets upset with that, she then transforms into Greg himself and says, oh yeah, because you're Mr. Sensitive or something like that. I don't remember the exact line. But as Greg says, look, I don't have time to humor you, Amethyst gets even more upset and says, I bet you would have stayed for her. I had someone I had a friend I could count on the whole time, and then you spent all your time with her. And when Greg is and as the tension continues to build, Amethyst once again shapeshifts into Rose Quartz. Yeah, this is kind of a big thing. And it obviously causes Greg very real distress to the point where he actually has to turn away to keep himself from breaking down. But Amethyst, being Amethyst, is still trying to provoke him and get him to turn around. At this point, Steven finally makes his presence known, and upon realizing that Steven was there and saw that whole debacle, Greg and Amethyst end up freezing up. And so Steven ends up giving them a speech about how, yeah, I get it. The past can be messy and dirty, and we don't want to confront it, so we keep distracting ourselves. But we have to go through it. We got to confront it because there's no more room. As such, with those words, Amethyst just ends up running out, and pretty much at this point, Greg finally just turns off the TV, and the episode cuts to the next day as Steven and Greg are running to the shed to clear it out, only to find the crystal gems are there already and have actually already cleared it out. 1 second. Sorry about that puppy emergency. But yeah, like I said, the crystal gems are there already, and they've already cleared everything out and organized everything. It turns out that after Amethyst kind of pushed it last night, she went back to Garnet and Pearl and essentially rallied them to help clear everything out. This time with the intent of taking everything that should be thrown away and just bringing it back to her room because, well, it's already a junk pile. Why not just add more junk to it? However, what I do kind of like about this moment is that that things are clearly awkward, and what she's trying to pretend nothing happened, but at the same time, she also can't pretend. But she does seem to make things she does make amends somewhat, as she gives Greg the box of stuff to keep, and in the box is a repaired frame for the picture of himself and Rose. It's pretty nice, and Greg does thank Amethyst, which does prompt her to get blushy and a little bit flustered before taking all the junk from his shed and leaving, when the episode ending with Steven and Greg closing the now empty shed. So there you go. Also, that ends well, I suppose. Which now brings us to this next episode, Marble Madness. And this episode actually begins with Steven and Connie hanging out, and Connie introducing Steven to a series of fantasy books called The Witch's Familiar. I think that's what it's called. In this case, which is supposed to be about a girl named Lisa and her familiar, which is a talking eagle by the name of Archimicarus. I'm only mentioning this because it's important in a later episode, but put simply, Connie's trying to get Steven more invested in this, especially since he's gotten more invested in books since he got grounded from TV. However, as Connie starts getting ready to read Steven some stuff from the first book, they end up getting interrupted as something ends up crashing into the ocean by the temple. And that something is a Robinoid. This time, though, this one is a lot bigger than the ones from before. As such, with the big boom, the crystal gems didn't wind up going outside and see the Robinoid, and they realized, yeah, Peridot obviously sent that. We need to stop. We need to destroy it, and so destroy it. They end up doing as it ends up going boom and covering the group with more goop. As such, while Steven does ask questions about what it was trying to do, the gems just kind of brush it off because whatever it was trying to do, can't do it now. It's dead. So the life goes on as normal. Steven tries getting into the books, and keeps asking Connie for questions, especially when he starts reading them out of order. But another Robinoid gets sent to Earth with the gems into taken care of, and once again, Steven goes back to the books before another one gets sent to Earth again. At this point, the gems are starting to get annoyed by it because they don't want to keep fighting these things over and over, and they have no idea why Peridot is sending them to Earth. So Steven posits a very interesting question. Why don't they just follow it? Yeah, they don't know what these things are on Earth for, but it clearly does, so why not just follow it to where it needs to go and see what happens? And while the gems are initially reluctant to do this, Garnet doesn't want to keep fighting these things forever, so she says, okay, fine, let's just do Steven's way. As such, the gems all just get on top of the giant Robinoid, and sure enough, what it was doing is that whenever a new Robinoid got sent to Earth, it was trying to get to a warp pad. Why? Because it wanted to use the warp pads to reach the kindergarten. In this case, for why it was there, well, the gems don't know, but as it wanders through the kindergarten, it happens to find a patch of dirt, which it burrows into and ends up, as it does this, it ends up going from a big round orb to a platform that ends up going underground. The gems end up following after it, and they're all clearly nervous and upset, but they're still trying to stay true to Steven's see what happens motif, and so as they go down, they eventually find themselves in an underground computer terminal. One that the gems didn't really know was there. As such, they end up just as they're wondering what this is here for and what it's doing, well, the Robinoid platform, as I'll call it, ends up still continuing to activate once it attaches to the cavern and the console and all the computers and technology, it ends up dropping a little bit of itself below, which turns into a mini Robinoid that goes up and goes to, I'm guessing, a hand scanner. It activates it, and sure enough, a video feed opens up between this room and Homeworld, specifically Peridot. Yeah. As such, the gems immediately duck for cover because at this point they realize, okay, the time for watching and learning is past. This is the time for action. As such, while Steven still wants to go in and ask more questions, the gems are ready to just go in guns blazing, or at the very least, try and be more organized, as they want to wait and observe and wait for an opening and then strike. But Steven, being Steven, he decides to just go in and damn the consequences. In the meantime, Peridot ends up using the proxy to activate more constructs in this computer terminal area, giving herself like giant hands that she can remotely control. And as she begins working on the console, she begins talking about how she had to get to the prime, how she managed to get to the prime kindergarten, how she's ready to check on its status, and just that's not part of her report. She makes an offhand comment about how this technology is very archaic, and that's when Steven responds, "I don't know, it's pretty cool. I think it's pretty cool," which makes Peridot aware of Steven's presence. As such, Steven ends up talking to her, and well, it's clear that things are still a little weak. That it's kind of it's like they're having two different conversations essentially. As Peridot, when Steven introduces himself to her, calls him, he's like, "Are there any other Stevens in the vicinity?" Steven says no. She asks if Stevens have replaced humans as the dominant life form, and Steven says no. It's like, no, there's a bunch of us. There's Lars, Sadie, the mailman, Connie, Onion, I think, etc. And so when Steven tries asking a counter question, Peridot just saying what she wants, Peridot just says, "I'm just going to finish what we started," and tries to use one of her giant hands to smush Steven, which prompts the crystal gems into action. And when Peridot sees them, she's actually shocked, and actually reveals another bombshell. Remember the Red Eye from episode 2 of Steven Universe? Yeah, it turns out that was her. For whatever reason, I'm guessing the Red Eye was supposed to be like an advanced scout, as she mentions how the Red Eye didn't detect any gems on Earth, which makes me think that initially the Red Eye was sent to Earth to scan the surface, see if there was anything that would impede their progress, and then report back, but since the gems blew it up with a laser light cannon, Peridot never got any data back, so she just assumed that there were no other gems on Earth. However, which ultimately the gems confirm, yeah, they've blown it up, and Peridot begins putting the pieces together. She realizes that these guys are the ones that are getting in her way, especially as it's because of them that the homeworld warp has been destroyed. It's why her flask robinoids, as she's called them, have not been able to reach this destination before, and she ends up getting upset and asks why they keep messing with her stuff. And the gems Pearl makes this grand speech about how they're the crystal gems and they're still the guardians of this planet and all living things that live on it. And Peridot's response is simply, the crystal gems? Which I love it, because that implies she has no idea who the hell they are. But immediately they get into action and end up getting to work smashing her giant hands before Amethyst managed to use her whip to grab one and smash it into the power source for the computer terminal. However, Peridot mentions during the fight that what she's doing is she's going to do what she has to do regardless of whether the gems get in her way or not. And as the connection is cut off, the last word she says to the crystal gems are, "I'm reporting this," before the video feed is cut off. As such, the episode ends with Steven apologizing that this is kind of a dumb move on his part, but Garnet does concede that he wasn't entirely wrong. They now know more than they did before. But yeah, Steven showing his hand like that was a very bad move. So yeah, that's how the episode ends. So. Okay, firstly, let's talk about maximum capacity. It's once again another character piece, and it's a very interesting one because it's a nice little character dynamic between Amethyst and Greg. Two characters that you kind of don't expect to be in cahoots, I suppose. In terms of personalities, they're both very much laid-back characters that kind of jive to their own tune, as it were. So it's not out of the realm of possibility of them being friends, but at the same time, when it comes to the Crystal Gems, Greg seemed to always kind of be at a distance with them. He was aware of them, he knew them, he had a good relationship with them, but their affairs and his affairs tended to be separate, with the one thing that tied them together being Steven, or before him, Greg's connection to Rose. As such, to kind of establish that he actually was friends with one of the gems, it's surprising, but also interesting, because it opens up more avenues for relationships and potential story arcs. In this case, the stuff with Amethyst. What I do like is that they don't really give a lot of explanation. Well, what I find interesting about learning about Greg and Amethyst's relationship is that it kind of makes you wonder what started it. Case in point, when the episode actually begins and you see the relationship in question, it very much feels like a codependent relationship of convenience. I know that sounds terrible and mostly sounds like word garbage, but hear me out. What I mean is, they seem to be using this relationship as a crutch to distract them from some of the heavier issues in their lives, so to speak. Case in point, when Amethyst is helping Greg go through all of his shit, keep in mind, she brings out the Lil Butler tapes when he finds the picture of rose quartz. That is what prompts Amethyst to suddenly get serious and then go off and find the tapes. And every single time throughout the episode that Greg considers stopping watching and then going back to going through organizing the junk, Amethyst keeps pulling him back, and she just keeps going on and on and on. And it starts feeling like that not only is she trying to distract him, but it's really feeling like that this is something that she's very much latched onto and wants to keep going. She wants to use it to distract not just from Greg's issues, but most likely her own. After all, as we've established in previous episodes, Amethyst has a lot of self-esteem issues, and learning that she and Greg used to have a friendship that did mostly subsist of them just sitting on their asses and watching the show, it kind of explains why she's desperate to keep it going. As Steven says at the end of the episode, yeah, the past can be messy, and the past is messy and weird and definitely full of bad stuff, and so it's hard to confront it, so you keep distract yourself. And that's what Amethyst keeps doing throughout the episode. Every time that Greg tries to stop what they're doing and go back to the serious stuff, Amethyst keeps pulling him back because she wants to keep going. She wants to keep going in this little escape of hers. She wants to stay in her little fantasy with her friend. The problem is, however, when he starts actually leaving the fantasy, she starts putting up a fight. At this point, it eventually starts getting to the point where it stops feeling like camaraderie and more toxic. As Greg tries to tell Amethyst, look, I don't want to do this anymore, she starts getting angrier and angrier, and it feels like she's trying to intimidate him in a way. Like, she's not actually threatening him or anything like that, but it feels like it's turning into psychological manipulation. Especially when she says, when she shapeshifts into Steven and tries to say, oh boy, I love the fireworks, now let's watch more Lil Butler, or when she shapeshifts into Greg to make fun of him, or when she finally transforms into Rose, which, yeah, that's a very big no-go area, because keep in mind, yeah, Greg probably mourned Rose too. He loved her. He had a kid with her, and now she's gone. And like I said, when she shapeshifts into Rose, Greg has to turn away, and how strained his voice is when he tells Amethyst to stop, that he can't do that, that he can't face this. It looks like he's doing everything in his power to not crack up, to not break down. And yet Amethyst is still behind him going, come on, Greg, turn around. It really does feel like a toxic relationship. Again, there is, I understand the whole escapism thing. And it's another thing that I honestly share with Amethyst. When it comes to, like, big stuff, I like to distract myself very much, which, yeah, that's kind of a big problem. But the way she keeps pushing it really does showcase a kind of darker side and a sort of dependence on Amethyst's part. Because as Greg continues trying to go back to everything, she keeps pulling him back in. And when he finally does try putting his foot down, she starts getting aggressive. Like I said, she doesn't actually hurt him, but she starts using dirty tricks to try and get him to stay, which, yeah, it's a very low blow in that regard. And I do like how but at the same time, you understand why she's doing it, because she wants to try, because she sees the serious stuff and she doesn't want to face it. She doesn't want to see all the serious and dangerous stuff that they go through, that are basically all the serious, angry stuff that might be on the surface, and just wants to focus on something else. Wants to focus on anything else, and she wants to do it with her friend. But that he's part of the fantasy, and she wants to keep it going. It isn't until Steven sees her push the envelope that Amethyst realizes, oh crap, I fucked up, and she runs off. And which again, it really does, which is understandable with how far she goes, because we've seen Amethyst with her self-esteem issues, and it gets to her a lot. So having this little escape, she wants to keep it going. But it's essentially, if you can think about the old saying, too much of a good thing is a bad thing. And at the end of the day, while it's nice to have a little escape, eventually you have to wake up to reality. And Amethyst, unfortunately, had to learn that the hard way when she finally pushed things too far with Greg. But I do also, another thing that I find interesting, you never learn why Amethyst and Greg you never learn what stopped Amethyst and Greg from hanging out in the end. It's implied that it's that Greg just decided to spend more time with Rose and sorry, lunch and a drink are trying to come back up. Anyway, like I said, it's implied that Greg started spending more time with Rose, but based on his reaction in this episode and as how he talked about how he didn't want to humor her anymore, my guess is that Greg in the past did learn that maybe he should stop this, and he eventually he decided, I have to get back to reality. But they never confirm it. It's implied, but never confirmed. So I kind of find it interesting you can speculate on that. But otherwise, I might need to pause to get some water. Okay, you know what? Hold on one second. I got some water. Okay. But like I said, it's a good lesson that essentially it's nice to have a little escape, but eventually you gotta wake up to reality. And the longer you stay in the fantasy, the harder it is to leave it. So I do kind of like that they showcased that with Amethyst, and I do like that by the end, Amethyst does realize she was in the wrong, and ultimately, she does try to make amends with Greg. There's still some awkward tension there, but both sides are clearly trying to still pursue a friendly relationship. So, and clearly, dry throat. So, it's nice to see Amethyst at least take the first step, so I like that. Good stuff. serious issues. Serious issues. Ultimately interesting stuff. So. But anyway, but then we have Marble Madness. This episode doesn't really have any character stuff to it, but it does have plot important details. In this case, okay, just 1 minute. My throat is very dry right now. Apologies for that. Lunch came back up with a vengeance, and it really dried out my throat. So I'm going to try and take it easy for the remaining vlog, but yeah, let's talk about Marble Madness. Personally, I do find this to be a very nice episode, especially in continuing the plot that we set up in Warp Tour. In this case, we get, like Garnet said, we get a bit more information on what's going on with the homeworld gems. We once more don't get a full picture. All we really know is that Peridot is trying to get access to something that's on Earth, specifically something in the kindergarten. So, at the very least, it is nice to see that plotline continue forward. And that's all. On top of that, we also get more information on just how big this is. That Peridot has been trying to get to Earth for a while. Not just in her. She didn't. Her first exposure to Earth wasn't just in her debut. She did send an advanced scout in the form of the Red Eye. So I do like seeing that kind of called back for Marble Madness. And at the same time, I do like the mystery of seeing Peridot sending the flask robinoids, as she calls them, to Earth. As, well, the gems, of course, attack these things with the same abandon they do everything else. Unfortunately, though, because their standard policy is shoot first, ask questions never, they don't really know what they're doing aside from smash robots. As such, it isn't what I do like is that Steven isn't like Garnet said, Steven is not entirely wrong in wanting to learn more information. After all, know thy enemy. And basically, if they can figure out what it is that Peridot's planning, they can mount a better defense and ultimately use that information to essentially take them down. Take Peridot and any future enemies down. As such, the idea of following the Robinoid back to its source and using that to gather more information, that's smart, and I do like that. The problem is, though, this episode still clearly showcases that Steven is still the junior member of the group because, well, his policies just keep asking questions. And while there are times when you have to ask questions and take a step back, there are also times when require action, and sometimes that action has to be in the form of precise action. In this case, once the gems learn that these things were essentially Peridot's way of trying to get a link to the Prime Kindergarten, that's what she calls the kindergarten, they realize, okay, this does need to be stopped, because whatever she's doing, we might need to put a cork in it. I think they've learned enough, at that point they realize they probably learned enough information, they know that underground chamber is there, they know that Peridot's been trying to access it, maybe they can, so at this point, maybe, just maybe, they can go in and start fighting, so I do actually like that. Hold on a second. Sorry, puppy emergency. But like I said, they know the underground chamber is there. They have more information. Yeah, they don't know everything yet, but this is still a step in the right direction. But ultimately, Steven exposing himself like he did, that was a bad move in general, so. Yeah, they definitely have more. They definitely know more than they did before, but Steven has kind of put them in a crosshair now. So, yeah, the bad guys know they're there now. And they're probably going to retaliate. So, especially when Peridot said that regardless of what the gems do, she's still going to fulfill her mission, and she's going to be reporting this. So yeah, there's going to be future updates going on, and you can blame Steven for all of those. So good job, universe. This will be the last one, I promise, and I'm almost done. So like I said, they know more, but at the same time, now they're in the bad guy's crosshairs, so that's it. So yeah, I do like that the episode does continue along the storyline that was established in Warp Tour, and as Garnet said, they now know more. They may not have all the pieces together, but at the same time, now the bad guys are aware they're there, and they're most likely going to retaliate now. So, yeah, there's definitely going to be some resurgence there. But at the same time, I do like kind of the mystery of it, as the audience, are also wondering what the Robonoids are doing on Earth, what Peridot's planning, and it is cool to see more of her. And honestly, I like the more. And honestly, the more you see of Peridot, the more you start to like her, because she seems very analytical, and I love her reaction when she first sees Steven. Like, she's just utterly shocked to see him there, and the way she talks to him is not of a person talking to another person. It's like a scientist talking to a test subject, which does give more window into Peridot's personality. How she's a lot more analytical, more distant, definitely more cold, less emotion, more logic. She does tend to get emotional if things aren't going her way, as once she learns the gems have been smashing her stuff, she begins getting angry and starts lashing out at them. But at the same time, it is kind of cool seeing more about her, and the more you see about her, the more you kind of like her. If that makes any sense, the more I liked her. So I kind of like seeing more of that. And again, like I said, it was interesting, and it did make you when she sent the Robonites to Earth, it did make you wonder what exactly she was planning. And like I said, that we now know, we the audience now know more. The Crystal Gems know that she wanted something here. But like I said, to get that information, they are now in the bad guys' crosshairs, and this is going to probably have consequences later. So, yeah, that's pretty much how things go. So, otherwise, yeah, Marble Madness is also a good episode in itself. In my opinion, between the two, I like both, but for different reasons. I like Maximum Capacity because of the character dynamics between Amethyst and Greg. And as such, what I like about that one is seeing just kind of the relationship between Amethyst and Greg, and kind of showing more of the toxic side to Amethyst's codependence, as she tries to distract herself so much that she ends up going into the fantasy, and to try and keep the fantasy going, she keeps pushing Greg more and more until eventually the friendship they almost had almost shatters. But at the end of the day, they still want to keep the friendship going. It's just that there's still baggage there. But like Steven said, they got to face that at some point. Yeah, it's hard to face it. Yeah, it's hard to face it sometimes, but you have to step into reality at some point. And by the end, I do like that Greg and Amethyst are trying to face it together. Well, figuratively, of course. But at the same time, like I said, despite the awkwardness, they both still want to be friends, and it's sweet, and I like where it goes. So I like that there. And what I like about Marble Madness is, once again, the plot progression. Seeing where things are going, seeing how they develop, learning more about what Peridot wants, and that it has something to do with the kindergarten. She's there to check something, but you don't know what. And again, with what Steven did, it's probably putting him the crystal gems in the crosshairs of Peridot and the other homeworld gems. So yeah, I like seeing that, and I like seeing that plot progress more. I like how we look to see more Peridot. Overall, I think both episodes are really good, but for different reasons. One for very interesting character developments and character dynamics, and the other for plot progression and adding more layers to the overarching story arc and where things are going to go. So, yeah, overall, two very good episodes. So, yeah, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. I apologize for the puppy interruptions and my dry throat, but I hope you still enjoyed the video regardless, and I hope to see you next week. Take care.